Right here. For today's culture lesson, I'd like to talk a bit about Roman names. At the end of this lesson, you should understand the three parts of a Roman name, how naming conventions, or nomenclature, differed between Roman men and Roman women, and how emancipated people, that is, former enslaved people, adopted new Roman style names upon gaining their freedom. At the end, we'll have a worksheet for you to practice using the information you've learned here and come up with your own Roman name. But first, let's discuss some key terms. The praenomen is sort of like our first name. Only boys get praenomina. Men are typically named after their fathers, uncles, or grandfathers. Thus, there are only about 35 praenomina that are attested to exist, of which 12 are actually common. I've put the common ones in bold. The abbreviation in parentheses after the name shows common abbreviations for the praenomina that you would see in texts or inscriptions. The nomen is sometimes called the gentilical name, and this denotes what clan or family, or gens, and they're like houses in Game of Thrones, that the person belongs to. This is the name from which female names are derived, and we'll come back to that. Cognomina denote what branch of a large family someone is from. For example, the Cornelii have several branches, such as the Sulli, the Scipiones, and the Lentuli. Not everyone had a cognomen, like Gnaeus Pompey or Gaius Marius. An ognomen is related to a cognomen. It is sort of a nickname that can either be achieved in war, like Publius Cornelius Africanus or Quintus Caecilius Metellus Creticus. Other times, the ognomen might refer to some physical or mental defect that either the person or their ancestors might have had. Cicero's ognomen comes from the fact that his ancestor had a wart on his nose that looked like a chickpea. Some ancestor of Marcus Licinius Crassus was fat. Pompeius Strabo was either cross-eyed himself or his ancestor was. When we look at a male Roman name, it has three parts, though at minimum two are required for males, the praenomen and the nomen. In this example, Gaius Julius Caesar, that Caesar, Gaius is the praenomen, or first name. It was his father's name. Julius is the clan name, the nomen. And Caesar is the branch of our family that our Julius Caesar was in. If there had been earlier branches of the Julii that weren't Caesares, they had all died out before our Caesar was born. Now, if you're a Roman male who's been adopted, things get a little different. Roman aristocrats, if their family lines were in danger of dying out, would sometimes adopt young sons from other families. Remember, infant mortality and healthcare were not great in antiquity, so if, say, a family had 6 children, 2 might survive to adulthood if they were lucky. When a Roman man was adopted, he took on a new name for his new family, while taking on an ognomen that represented his old gentilical name with the suffix ianus, I-A-N-U-S, to denote adoption. One example is the Emperor Augustus, born Gaius Octavius Thurinus, but then adopted by his great uncle, Gaius Julius Caesar, so he becomes Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. The sons of Aemilius Paulus offer a good example of the use of adoption and the frequency of child mortality in antiquity. Lucius Aemilius Paulus was a man of a blue blood Roman family, the Aemilii of the Paulus branch. Another famous branch was the Lepidi, and we're going to come back to them later in the term. Paulus had 4 sons. The eldest sons were adopted out, and while we don't know their original names, one became Publius Cornelius Scipio Aemilianus, later earning the cognomen Africanus. The other became Quintus Fabius Maximus Aemilianus. Now, Paulus still had 2 younger sons, but as he went off toward Macedonia to fight King Perseus, taking his 2 older, now adopted sons with him, his third son died. When Paulus came back to Rome in victory for his triumphal parade, his fourth and final son died. With the older sons adopted out, Paulus was left with no children, and when he died shortly later, so did his branch of the Aemilii. The statue I've got pictured here is a Hellenistic, that is Greek, but after Alexander the Great, a bronze that could possibly be of Scipio Aemilianus, although that identification is disputed. What about women? Now, as I said earlier, when the Romans named women, they turned to the gentilical name or nomen and made it feminine. So any daughter of Julius Caesar, and he only had one, would be a Julia. If a family had multiple daughters, they'd come up with some sort of nickname system like Julia Prima, Julia Segunda, Julia Tertia. Another example is Marcus Tullius Cicero. His only daughter was named Tullia. He had two children, his daughter and a younger son who was named after him. And it's very clear from even a cursory reading of Cicero's letters that his daughter was his favorite child. Finally, the enslaved. While enslaved, they would retain their original name, whatever that might be. And now, while there are many evils associated with slavery, in whatever context we find it, we can say that the Romans tended to be more generous in emancipating those they had enslaved in comparison to, say, the antebellum American South. The emancipated, upon receiving their freedom, would, if they were men, take on the praenomen and nomen of their former enslaver, while keeping their own name as an ognomen. For example, Cicero's slave Tiro, after Cicero freed him, became Marcus Tullius Tiro. Another example is the 10,000 Cornelii who were freed by Lucius Cornelius Sulla. What I've pictured here is a Roman slave collar, which would give the enslaved's name and the enslavers, and from which we could reconstruct, if they were ever freed, what their name would have been. Okay, remember that this is a PowerPoint that's on Google Classroom in addition to the link to the YouTube video here for you to, and you can check on, refer to it as you complete the worksheet, which is also on Google Classroom. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact Dr. Wright.